We talk endlessly about boomers and millennials. We dissect Gen Z like they are some fascinating new species. But right in the middle, there is an entire demographic quietly keeping the modern economy running. Generation X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980. They are your older coworkers who rarely complain, the people who built the infrastructure of the internet, yet have no interest in broadcasting their breakfast on it. Their quietness is a neurological adaptation. Their brains were wired by a very specific, high-stakes window in history. To understand how they operate today, we have to stop looking at their modern behavior and examine the exact environmental pressures of the 1970s and 80s that forged their minds. In 1978, 7 million children returned from school to an entirely empty house. These latchkey kids spent hours every day without a single adult present. There were no smartphones and no Ring cameras. If you got hurt or the stove caught fire, you were the only one there to handle it. You learned early that you couldn't always count on someone being there. This created a high contingency environment. It describes a setting where your actions have immediate, real-world results, with no buffer time and no parental safety net to soften the landing. When parents did arrive, rule enforcement was often immediate and unemotional. You couldn't talk your way out of a mistake. You simply paid the price for it right then and there. Years of making unsupervised decisions and living with the immediate fallout trained their brains to calculate risks in real time. This is why Gen X today often manages a crisis with a calm, 3-steps-ahead efficiency that baffles younger coworkers. Outside the home, the macro world was just as volatile. The 1970s saw massive spikes in divorce rates, showing a generation of children that even the nuclear family wasn't stable. They watched the collapse of the American corporate promise. Loyal employees who gave their all were suddenly discarded during mass restructuring, leading to the question, who is buying when the jobs are gone? This bred a protective emotional armor, known as defensive pessimism. It is a calculated realism. They hope for success, but they expect the rug to be pulled out, because that is what they saw happen to their parents. That anxiety was reinforced by the constant shadow of the Cold War. Schools conducted duck-and-cover drills, teaching children to hide under plywood desks to survive a nuclear blast. While adults insisted things were under control, the evening news showed leaders making terrible decisions. From Watergate to economic crises, Gen X saw authority figures fail repeatedly. That failure of leadership extended into public health as the AIDS crisis worsened. It cemented a belief that when things go wrong, the national institutions meant to protect you may not show up at all. Witnessing this institutional failure taught Gen X that irony is a necessary shield. They keep things at arm's length because distance feels safer in a world where the rules keep changing. Their work ethic was built on tangible, high-responsibility jobs. At 12 years old, a child was often responsible for delivering the news to an entire neighborhood before sunrise. Before the internet, information required physical effort. Finding an answer meant spending hours in a library, hunting through card catalog drawers for a single book. Cognitive psychologists call this beeper encoding. Because finding information required significant time and labor, that knowledge became more permanently integrated into their memory than a quick search result. This physical cost of knowledge built a deep respect for personal competence. Because they had to verify facts and fix things themselves, they value actual skill over a fancy job title that doesn't produce results. But this conditioning carries a heavy cost. This extreme self-reliance is their most defining trait, but it is also their deepest psychological vulnerability. Research in adult development shows that during periods of severe stress, Gen Xers report the lowest levels of seeking social support of any living generation. To a person raised alone in an empty house, asking for help can feel like admitting defeat. They would rather handle a crisis themselves than depend on someone who might not show up. You see this struggle manifest in how they parent today. They often overcorrect, providing their children with the constant supervision and digital visibility they never had. Yet, because they learned that being visible makes you vulnerable, they carry a quiet worry. They fear the hyper-connected modern world is making their children too dependent to survive a real crisis. Generation X will likely be the final group of humans to understand the value of being alone with their thoughts, being bored, and living disconnected from the grid. They are the literal bridge generation, the critical architectural support holding the dying analog and chaotic digital worlds together. There is a generational irony here. They are doing the heavy lifting to keep society from collapsing, expecting no praise and remaining perfectly content to stay invisible.